The gunshot echoed through the Tuscan hills, slicing the dawn silence like a blade through silk. Morning mist hovered over olive groves and vineyards peaceful, indifferent to violence. But within the elegant stone walls of a centuries-old villa, betrayal had bloomed silently, like a poisonous flower hidden in a perfect garden. There are moments that define a life, moments where choices carry weight heavier than iron chains. For one woman, abandoned and betrayed, this was that moment caught in a deadly web woven by the person she trusted most. Her heart pounded with every passing second, each beat whispering survival, vengeance, justice, now, alone beneath the shadow of luxury corrupted by greed. She waited, knowing the next few minutes would either destroy her forever or unleash a storm powerful enough to bring down an empire. Margaret Maggie Turner never thought she would find herself halfway across the world, desperately hungry and stumbling through a remote Italian mountain road at dusk. But there she was, dust clinging to her once pristine blazer, the stale taste of fear in her mouth. Only a few days earlier, she had boarded a private jet from New York with her husband, Daniel Turner, expecting a romantic getaway to Tuscany, a reward after what Daniel claimed was a major business victory. Maggie was 48 but felt older, worn down by the careful balancing act of marriage. She had once been Margaret Elderfield, a high-flying forensic accountant renowned for her intellect and fearless pursuit of fraudsters. Then she met Daniel, who seemed to embody everything she found admirable: ambition, a charming smile, and an uncanny skill for closing deals. Over a decade ago, she had surrendered her last name for his, quietly resigned from her job, and stepped into the role of supportive wife. Those first years of marriage were filled with half-truths she hadn't recognized at the time. Daniel told her he wanted children, but after her heartbreaking miscarriage and a subsequent brush with thyroid cancer, he gently dissuaded any attempts to continue that journey, claiming concern for her health. He persuaded her to let him handle all the complex details of their finances. "I want you stress-free," he would say, guiding her away from the spreadsheets and bank statements she once devoured with professional zeal. Maggie acquiesced, assuming it was his way of caring. Yet in quiet moments, especially at night, she wondered if she was still the fearless forensic accountant who once testified in federal courts, or if she had become a ghost of that woman, drifting from dinner party to dinner party, always smiling and nodding at Daniel's circle of associates. Everything changed when Daniel insisted they take a trip to a remote region of Italy. He told her it was a spontaneous celebration. Victor Hayes and Clark Raymond, two longtime business partners, would be joining them. It was supposed to be a blend of sightseeing and private meetings Daniel swore were just formalities. Maggie began noticing a shift in his tone whenever she asked about the specifics of these meetings. When she pressed too far, Daniel's jaw would tighten, and the kindness that once lured her in would harden into something unrecognizable. On the flight over, she caught Daniel whispering furtively on his phone. It was in hushed tones, though he did not attempt to hide the foreign numbers lighting up his screen. By the time their car wound its way up the narrow mountain roads to a decrepit hotel that Daniel claimed was part of the scenic route, Maggie's unease had blossomed into outright anxiety. A half hour later, with the sky shifting into a bruised purple, Victor and Clark appeared in their rented SUV behind them. The men exchanged cryptic glances, conferred with Daniel, then signaled for Maggie to step out and wait near the hotel's peeling front steps. "We'll be right back," Daniel announced, voice dripping with condescension. "Just need to handle a small issue." But instead of returning, they all drove away, leaving her stranded and alone in the deepening twilight. Maggie stood in the courtyard, fury and confusion warring in her chest. At first, she told herself they would come back in a matter of minutes, that perhaps Daniel was merely giving her a lesson for prying into details he deemed off limits. She paced the gravel, counting each sound of her own heartbeat, until the only noise was the rustling of cypress trees in the encroaching darkness. 10 minutes turned into 30, then an hour. The sun dipped fully behind the mountains, turning the sky into an inky canvas. Maggie's designer heels were ill-suited for the uneven gravel, and by the time she accepted that Daniel was not returning, her feet ached so badly she could hardly walk. She forced herself to examine the old hotel. It was called Villa Rosetta, a name that might have evoked romantic images in more hopeful circumstances. The front door was slightly ajar, and pale light glowed faintly from within. A battered sign, half hanging by rusted chains, swung in the breeze. A large chunk of plaster had fallen off, revealing the worn stone beneath. Hesitant, but with no other option, Maggie stepped inside. The lobby smelled of must and old wood. The floors were made of stone tiles that must have seen better days decades ago. A battered reception desk stood near a curved staircase. She spotted no one at first. Then, from behind a door labeled Ufficio, emerged an elderly woman with silver hair drawn into a loose bun. Scusi the woman called, her voice trembling slightly. She took in Maggie's disheveled appearance with a mixture of caution and compassion. Maggie attempted to speak in halting Italian, gleaned from a single semester in college decades earlier, but quickly switched to English out of desperation. "I'm sorry. My name is, well, I'm Maggie. Do you speak English?" The woman nodded slowly. "I am Lucia Benedetti. I at least partially own this hotel. Are you a guest?" "We do not have many visitors these days." Maggie blurted out the entire humiliating truth, how her husband and his partners had driven off, leaving her stranded, how she had no working phone signal, no car, no money. The words spilled out in a breathless rush. Lucia listened carefully, then gently guided Maggie into a small back office where a single lamp illuminated a messy desk. "You sit," Lucia said, opening a mini fridge to retrieve a chilled bottle of water. "Here, drink. You look not so good." Maggie's eyes welled with grateful tears, but she fought them back. She had no clue why Daniel would do this to her unless it was more than just a punishment for asking questions. Perhaps it was a decisive move to isolate her or to keep her from discovering something he was terrified she might find. While taking measured sips of water, Maggie glanced around the office. Amid ancient filing cabinets and tattered receipts, she noticed a brand new high-end scanner and a small but sophisticated computer setup that seemed out of place in this worn, dated environment. That was the first tiny crack in the picture Daniel had painted for her. Something more was going on here than a quaint mountain retreat gone to seed. After Maggie settled in for the night, Lucia led her to a modest guest room on the ground floor. The bed's mattress sagged, and the pillows were threadbare, but at least it was warm. Lucia apologized repeatedly for the hotel's neglected state. "We used to be very successful," she explained, her voice tinged with sadness. "Back in the 1970s and 1980s, my husband, Enrico, and I welcomed so many travelers. But times changed. Fewer people came. I could not afford the renovations. Now, only the ground floor is livable, and even that is a challenge." Maggie tried to sleep, but her thoughts raged. Daniel's face swam before her, a collage of conflicting memories: the man who brought her flowers during her chemo sessions, the man who whispered sweetly in her ear on their anniversary cruises, the same man who just abandoned her in a foreign country without a second thought. Why? She replayed the subtle clues she had ignored for years, his insistence on controlling their finances, the hush in his voice whenever he discussed certain business deals, the new phone line he had opened for international clients, and then there was Victor and Clark, always sharing sidelong glances at dinners or house gatherings, often leaving Maggie out of any meaningful conversation. Unable to rest, she got up and wandered the hallway, careful not to disturb Lucia. A flicker of light at the far end of the corridor caught her eye. She followed it to a storage room with a door slightly open. Inside, an antique lamp illuminated a wooden table piled high with ledgers and folders. On top sat that same computer setup Maggie had noticed in Lucia's office. The scanner's green light blinked quietly, and next to it lay a neat stack of documents with official-looking stamps and headings in English and Italian. Maggie's professional instincts kicked in, that old surge of curiosity that once led her to uncover hidden money trails. She knew it was a violation of privacy to snoop, but she justified it by recalling that she might be in danger. She needed to understand what was happening in this old hotel that warranted expensive technology and secret documents. Leaning in, she skimmed the top page. It was an account statement from a Swiss bank, referencing large wire transfers. Her breath hitched. She saw the name of a shell corporation that rang a bell, something Daniel had once mentioned in passing. Fingers trembling, Maggie lifted a second folder. This one contained spreadsheets mapping funds between multiple countries: Italy, Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and the United States. And near the bottom of that page, she saw three names typed in official black print: Daniel Turner, Victor Hayes, and Clark Raymond. Her heart thundered in her chest. This wasn't just a quaint property or some random real estate plan. This place, Villa Rosetta, was at the center of an elaborate financial scheme. The presence of her husband's name alongside these suspicious transactions confirmed that the so-called secret business had something deeply illegal going on. Before she could read more, she heard footsteps approaching. In a flash, she placed the pages back as neatly as possible and slipped behind a tall stack of chairs. Lucia entered, carrying a flashlight. Maggie's heart pounded so violently she feared Lucia would hear it. "Hello," Lucia called softly, shining the flashlight around. "Maggie, are you awake?" The next morning, after a restless sleep, Maggie found Lucia in the hotel's kitchen, a modest room with a tiny stove and a single sink where the water pressure barely functioned. The windows overlooked the courtyard, where weeds pushed through cracks in the pavement. Maggie took in the sight with fresh eyes. She realized Villa Rosetta had once been grand. The bones of the building hinted at well-crafted architecture, decorative moldings, and a design meant for an affluent clientele. Yet so much was now in disrepair: peeling paint, missing shutters, a broken fountain in the courtyard. It was both sad and strangely beautiful. Lucia set out coffee and some leftover bread for breakfast. "You look uneasy," she observed gently. Maggie debated how much to reveal. Part of her worried that Lucia might be complicit in the suspicious activities, but the older woman's kind eyes and obvious financial struggles suggested otherwise. Deciding to take a calculated risk, Maggie asked about the computer and scanner in the storage room. Lucia paused, her face pinching in mild distress. "Those were installed by three men who come here every few weeks. They pay me in cash. They say it is for document archiving, but I do not know. They always lock the room after. Usually they come at night, rarely in daytime. One of them is your husband." "Yes," Maggie nodded, her throat tight. "Daniel Turner is my husband. I didn't realize he was using this hotel for business." Lucia offered a sympathetic frown. "I do not ask questions. They pay well. I need the money, but I do not like how they act. So secretive." Maggie recalled the precarious state of her own finances, or rather, the finances Daniel kept hidden from her. She realized that if Lucia, a simple widow trying to make ends meet, was entangled in this operation, there had to be a deeper reason. The older woman had no illusions about who truly controlled the arrangement. "Do you think they will come back for you?" Lucia asked gently, sensing Maggie's turmoil. Maggie tried to answer, but found herself choked with uncertainty. Would Daniel return to fetch her once he realized she'd rummaged through those documents? Or would he leave her stranded indefinitely, hoping she'd remain silent out of confusion or fear? After all, Maggie had been out of the investigative game for nearly a decade. He might believe she no longer had the sharpness or contacts to expose him. Maggie decided she needed more than guesswork. She needed to reach out to someone who could help her navigate this. In her old life, she had colleagues at Peterson and Wolf, the forensic accounting firm. There was one mentor in particular, David Kessler, who had always encouraged her to keep an eye out for patterns others might miss. Maybe he could connect her to the right authorities. But for that, Maggie needed a phone signal, internet access, some secure way to communicate. Lucia mentioned a small village down the mountain had a public phone, though it was a long walk. Maggie glanced at her expensive heels, now scuffed and ruined, and knew she had no choice. Her safety and possibly Lucia's depended on unraveling whatever secret Daniel had buried here. They saw yin. That afternoon, Maggie set off on foot, wearing a pair of old sandals Lucia loaned her. They were too big, but at least they didn't grind her feet raw on the gravel roads. The midday sun glared off the winding asphalt that snaked through the mountains. She brought only a small backpack with some water and a few euros Lucia dug out from a jar, labeled just in case. After about an hour of trudging downhill, she reached a tiny hamlet, a cluster of stone houses, a modest church, and a single cafe with 3 outdoor tables. Inside the cafe, she found a dusty phone booth near the restrooms. A relic from another era. With shaking hands, she dialed an international calling card number Lucia had also provided. The line hissed and crackled before a ring finally sounded. On the third ring, a familiar voice answered, David Kessler speaking. Hearing that voice nearly brought Maggie to tears. She introduced herself, bracing for a torrent of questions as to why she was calling from a random phone booth in rural Italy. David's shock was immediate. "Maggie, my God, we haven't talked in years. Are you all right?" Maggie explained in halting phrases that she suspected Daniel was involved in something illegal, that she was effectively trapped in a decaying hotel, and that she'd seen partial evidence of Swiss accounts and cross-border financial transactions. David fell silent, processing this. "You never told me Daniel was into shady dealings." He finally said. Maggie's laugh was humorless. "I didn't know. I gave up investigating when I married him. I trusted him." She hesitated, then added quietly, "I might have been an unwitting participant. My name could be all over these accounts for all I know." David's tone grew serious. "All right, listen carefully. I still have contacts at the Department of Justice and with some folks who moved on to the FBI. If your husband is running an international laundering scheme, you need professional backup, and you need it fast. Don't do this alone." Maggie swore under her breath, recalling that Daniel and his associates had cunning legal teams and bottomless pockets apparently filled with ill-gotten money. David continued, "Stay put if you can. Don't confront him until you have real protection. I'll make some calls." As the call ended, Maggie felt a swirl of relief and dread. Relief, because she had someone back home who believed her. Dread, because she understood how dangerous Daniel and his partners could be if they sensed she was about to expose them. She decided that returning to Villa Rosetta was still her best bet. She would gather more evidence discreetly. With David's help, maybe she could coordinate with an American authority figure, someone like an FBI liaison in Italy, who could protect both her and Lucia. Before leaving the cafe, She bought a small sandwich and a bottle of water, grateful for the nourishment. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. She steeled herself for the uphill trek back, but each step forward was powered by a renewed sense of purpose. It dawned on her that for the first time in years, she felt the old investigative spark, that unwavering drive to see justice done, even if it meant toppling the carefully crafted life she had shared with Daniel. Night fell quickly as Maggie made her return journey. About halfway up the winding road, she noticed headlights flashing around a distant turn. Fear clutched her. Was it Daniel or one of his associates? She slipped behind a gnarled olive tree, heart pounding. The car slowed but continued past without stopping. Once it vanished into the darkness, she resumed walking, mind racing. Every sound, every rustle in the bushes, felt like a potential threat. She could almost hear Daniel's dismissive voice in her head, mocking her caution. When she finally arrived back at the hotel, Lucia greeted her with obvious relief. "I was worried," the older woman admitted. "This place gets very dark at night, and there are sometimes unsavory people around." Maggie nodded, carefully avoiding mentioning the near panic she felt on the road. Instead, she shared that she had managed to contact an old colleague who might help them, but we need more evidence, Maggie said. "You said these men come every few weeks to use the hotel. Do we know when they'll be back?" Lucia's gaze flickered to the battered calendar pinned to the wall. "They mentioned next time would be in 5 days," she replied. "They never give an exact date, but they usually arrive late and leave before dawn." Maggie considered this carefully, recognizing that she had a short window in which to gather and secure incriminating information. If she could get hold of the files on that computer system, take photos, or better yet, export them onto a flash drive, she might have enough to present to the authorities. The key would be remaining undetected. She rummaged through the dusty storeroom again that night. With Lucia's hesitant assistance, they discovered that the men kept the most sensitive folders in a locked steel cabinet. "I tried once to open it," Lucia confessed quietly, "but they threatened me, said they would pull their payments if I meddled. This money, it helps me keep the lights on. I am ashamed, but I needed it." Maggie placed a reassuring hand on Lucia's shoulder. "Don't be ashamed. They took advantage of your situation. They spent the next few hours methodically documenting what they could." Maggie found more references to T.Y.'s holdings and Salerno Limited, two offshore entities that seemed to be funneling millions of dollars from the U.S. to accounts in Switzerland and the Caymans, then back to Italy. The sums involved were staggering. Maggie tried to remain calm, but her hands trembled each time she recognized Daniel's signature on a contract or instruction letter. She took photos using Lucia's old digital camera, the only tool at their disposal. Although the resolution was poor, it was better than nothing. Each snapshot felt like a small victory, a tangible piece of a puzzle that might save them from Daniel's wrath. By the time they finished, it was nearly 3 in the morning. Exhausted but resolute, Maggie and Lucia hid the camera in a loose floorboard beneath the reception desk. "You sleep," Lucia said with gentle insistence. "Tomorrow, we will see what we can do." Maggie climbed into the same sagging bed as before, her muscles aching from the day's exertion, but her mind buzzed with a fierce new clarity. She was through living in ignorance. She might have been left for dead on this mountain, but she refused to become just another victim. At dawn, Maggie was startled awake by the sound of shattering glass. She bolted upright, adrenaline surging. In the hallway, she found Lucia standing rigid, eyes wide, pointing toward the broken window near the lobby entrance. There, a jagged rock lay on the floor, surrounded by shards. A piece of paper was wrapped around it, secured with twine. Maggie's stomach dropped. Someone had deliberately hurled a message into the hotel. Unfolding the note, Maggie read the words scrawled in rough English. Stop snooping. This is your first and only warning. There was no signature. Lucia's lips trembled. It must be them, she whispered, her voice trembling. They must know we've been, Maggie cut in. It could be any one of their hired goons, or someone local they've paid off. Either way, they know we're on to them. Maggie realized they needed outside help immediately. David Kessler had said he would make calls, but she couldn't just wait around to see if the cavalry arrived in time. The next few hours were a blur of frantic planning. Lucia insisted on boarding up the window to prevent easy access for intruders. Maggie grabbed a toolkit from the supply room, and together they nailed wooden planks across the gap, reinforcing it as best they could. All the while, Maggie's mind whirled. Had Daniel orchestrated this so soon he had left her to rot? But apparently, that wasn't enough. He wanted her silent, permanently. After securing the lobby, Maggie and Lucia retreated to the small office behind the reception desk. We need to call the local police, Lucia ventured. Maggie nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure how much local authorities could handle a sophisticated international scheme. Still, reporting vandalism was a start. Lucia picked up the phone, only to realize the line was dead. Maggie checked her cell phone's zero signal. They had been effectively cut off. Lucia's face paled. We do have an old radio phone in the basement for emergencies when the power goes out, but it might be broken. Bracing themselves, they descended into the basement, which smelled of mold and damp stone. The radio phone was indeed ancient, resting on a dusty shelf. Lucia fiddled with its knobs and antenna, cursing in Italian when no static came through. Maggie took a turn, adjusting the frequency. At first, nothing but silence, then a faint crackle like a whisper from another world. She tried speaking into the receiver, calling for any sort of emergency station that might pick them up. No reply. The device seemed beyond their ability to fix. Deflated, they returned upstairs to rethink. Maggie weighed the idea of risking the trek down to the village again, but if someone had thrown that rock, it meant they were being watched. She could walk into an ambush. Lucia suggested they wait until midday, when more locals would be on the roads. Meanwhile, Maggie felt an urgent need to confirm if David had managed to contact anyone in law enforcement on her behalf. If the FBI or some allied agency knew about her situation, they might already be mobilizing. The note's threat looped in her mind. Stop snooping. This is your first and only warning. She had seen enough corporate intimidation in her forensic days to know that threats usually escalated if unheeded. Daniel and his partners had no reason to show restraint now that she had glimpsed their secrets. The only real option was to push forward. Pulling Lucia aside, Maggie outlined a plan. They would gather all the evidence they could, keep multiple copies hidden in different spots, and then find a way to safely contact the authorities. Because if the men who wrote that note thought they could scare her back into silence, they were about to learn just how stubborn an ex-forensic accountant could be when her life was on the line. Determined to outmaneuver the menacing forces arrayed against her, Maggie decided to do a comprehensive inventory of the questionable documents stored at Villa Rosetta. She and Lucia spent the morning prying open drawers, searching closets, and carefully reviewing any document that appeared suspicious. The scale of the operation stunned Maggie. She found multiple references to real estate transactions in not just Tuscany, but also Lombardy and Lazio, shell companies linked to bank accounts in Zurich, and shipping manifests that mentioned the Caymans. It was as if the entire hotel had become a nerve center for laundering money from multiple channels. Halfway through cataloging, Lucia discovered a large metal strongbox beneath a false bottom in a dusty supply cabinet. She tugged it free, coughing from the cloud of dust. The lock appeared new and sturdier than the battered furniture around it. Without hesitation, Maggie reached for a screwdriver and small hammer they had been using to open drawers. She manipulated the lock, employing old lock-picking tricks gleaned from her forensics work. After a tense 5 minutes, there was a satisfying click. Inside, they found a treasure trove of incriminating material, meticulously kept ledgers, external hard drives, and even color copies of passports, some real, some with obviously doctored photos. Maggie recognized Daniel's handwriting in the margins of the ledgers, scrawled notes about maximizing Swiss throughput and hiding Q4 surpluses. The reality was inescapable. Her husband was a key player in an international money laundering ring. Perhaps worst of all, she found references to Tea in the corner of certain documents. They seemed to indicate that her name, Margaret Turner, might have been used as a signatory for some accounts. The thought of being unwittingly implicated caused her hands to shake. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that with each piece of evidence they found, she was better equipped to exonerate herself by revealing the truth to the right authorities. By late afternoon, the entire office was in disarray. Files, folders, and old receipts were strewn across tables. Both women were exhausted, but they pressed on, snapping photographs of key documents using Lucia's digital camera and a spare phone Maggie found in a drawer likely left behind by a previous tenant. The phone had no SIM card, but it could still function as a camera. They also made rough notes in a small notebook, listing every shell corporation and suspicious transaction. If one set of evidence was lost or confiscated, hopefully another could survive. Do you think Daniel or his men are watching us right now? Lucia asked, her voice quivering. Maggie glanced at the boarded-up window. It's possible, but if they were, I suspect they'd have tried something more direct by now. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of being surveilled, as though eyes were peering through the cracks in the ancient stone walls. Every so often, she would peek outside, expecting to see a dark figure lurking among the cypress trees. Nothing, just the eerie stillness of the mountains. They decided to hide a portion of the digital evidence in a separate location, an empty wine crate in the hotel's massive wine cellar, which had long since run dry. It was a labyrinth of corridors that once stored casks and bottles for wealthy travelers. If forced by intruders to reveal the evidence, they might only find the portion hidden beneath the reception desk, leaving the rest safe. By evening, Maggie was worn to the bone, but for the first time in years, she felt alive, galvanized by a sense of purpose that transcended the comfortable illusions of her old life. Their grim routine continued into the next day. After a scant breakfast of stale bread and watery coffee, Maggie and Lucia ventured out to check the perimeter of the property. A low mist clung to the base of the mountains, giving the entire scene a moody, foreboding quality. At the far end of Villa Rosetta's courtyard stood what had once been a small guest cottage, its roof partially collapsed. Maggie suspected Daniel and his associates might use it as an off-site hideout for contraband. Carefully, they stepped over broken beams, scanning for anything out of place. Aside from scattered rodents and debris, it appeared deserted. Returning to the main building, Maggie's nerves were on edge. She found herself jumping at small sounds, the creak of an ancient door, the rustle of leaves against a cracked window. The sense of an impending confrontation pressed down on her. She knew from her old days investigating corporate fraud that criminals often escalated quickly once they realized their secrets were uncovered. That threatening note was just the beginning. By midday, the tension took a physical toll. Lucia complained of a headache and retired to her room for a brief rest. Left alone, Maggie leafed through a final stack of receipts at the reception desk. She spotted a consistent pattern, large cash payments recorded under different guest names on the same dates Daniel had told her he was attending tech conventions in Europe. Her mind whirled, correlating times and places, building a mental map of the deception. She realized how cunning Daniel had been, constructing a story for her about traveling abroad for investor meetings or product launches, while in reality funneling illicit money through the old hotel. Suddenly, she heard a vehicle engine in the driveway. Her heart leaped. She ducked behind the desk and peered through the broken edges of the window they had boarded up. A dusty sedan stopped near the main entrance. She saw a single figure step out, a man wearing a baseball cap, face partially concealed. He looked around, as if checking the premises. Maggie stilled her breathing, worried he might have come to deliver another threat. Then he turned and opened the trunk, pulling out a box. A moment later, he placed it on the doorstep, knocked loudly on the door, and hurried back to his car. The sedan sped away, leaving a plume of dust in its wake. Cautiously, Maggie approached the box. It bore no shipping label or address, just her name scrawled in black marker. Maggie. She gulped, weighing her fear against her curiosity. She carefully pried open the lid. Inside, to her shock, was a cell phone and a small note from David K. Urgent. Relief flooded her. David had somehow managed to get a phone couriered to her. Beneath the phone was another folded piece of paper. It read, Maggie. Law enforcement is involved. FBI agent Sidney Chin wants to talk. The phone has a preloaded contact. Stay safe. Reading the message. Maggie's eyes misted. David had truly come through for her. This was her lifeline. She glanced around, still feeling the eerie sense that someone might be watching, then rushed back inside. If the criminals had intercepted that box, they surely would have destroyed it. The fact it arrived at all gave her hope that the tide was turning, but she also knew that once she made contact with the FBI, there would be no going back. Lucia, Maggie called softly as she entered the older woman's room, phone clutched in her hand. Lucia rubbed her temples, wincing. My head is better now. What is it? Maggie waved the phone. It's from David, my colleague in New York. He managed to get an FBI contact to help us. They're aware of Daniel's operation. Lucia's eyebrows rose, a mixture of relief and apprehension. FBI. They can stop these criminals. Yes, Maggie exhaled. They can. If we can provide them with solid evidence. We've gathered plenty, but we need a safe way to turn it over, and we need to protect ourselves until the arrests can be made. She hesitated. Lucia, once I call, we're crossing a line. Daniel, Victor, Clark, they'll know the moment law enforcement steps in. They might come after us harder than ever. Lucia took a shaky breath. We have no choice. Either we wait for them to destroy us, or we fight back with the law. Her voice steadied. Call them. Maggie. Maggie nodded. They locked themselves in the office, turned off all the lights, and Maggie dialed the preloaded contact labeled AC, emergency only. After several rings, a crisp voice answered. This is Agent Sidney Chin. Who am I speaking with? Maggie introduced herself, voice trembling at first. She explained how she was an American citizen stranded in Italy, that her husband and his associates appeared to be laundering money using a derelict hotel as their base, and that she had evidence, extensive records, bank statements, digital files. Agent Chin asked pointed, probing questions, clarifying the scope of the operation. Maggie recounted everything: the shell companies, the suspicious visitors, the Swiss accounts, the intimidation tactics. This is bigger than we realized, Agent Chin remarked after Maggie finished. We've had Daniel Turner on our radar for questionable financial dealings, but we lacked concrete evidence. You say you have documented proof. Maggie nodded. even though Chen couldn't see her. Yes, multiple backups, photos, ledgers, everything. There was a pause on Chen's end. All right, we need to coordinate with Italian authorities and ensure your safety. We might send a small unit or local police to secure the property, but that depends on certain legalities. Keep everything hidden and remain vigilant. Most importantly, do not confront them directly if they show up. Let us handle it. A sense of relief mixed with dread washed over Maggie. She had done it, she'd triggered an international law enforcement response, but she also knew criminals of Daniel's caliber wouldn't go down without a fight. After concluding the call, Maggie slumped against the desk. They're sending help, she told Lucia, forcing a smile. We just have to stay alive until it arrives. Night approached once more, and the hotel's dilapidated halls felt especially eerie. That evening, Maggie and Lucia took shifts, one sleeping while the other kept watch. Maggie's dreams, when she managed to doze, were filled with half-remembered glimpses of Daniel's face, contorted by anger, and the echo of nails being driven into boarded windows. When her watch began, she sat in a chair with a flashlight in hand, scanning every shadow. The minutes crawled. She found her mind wandering to what she would say to Daniel if he reappeared. Would she call him a monster or demand an explanation for every lie he had told? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that confrontation would likely bring no satisfaction, only danger. The real victory, she decided, would be seeing him escorted away in handcuffs. Late in the night, a low growl of an engine rumbled up the mountain road. Maggie rushed to Lucia's room, gently shaking her awake. They quickly moved to the small upper balcony, which provided a vantage point over the courtyard. Though they had to crouch behind a crumbling parapet, headlights illuminated the dusty driveway. Two vehicles arrived in succession, a black SUV and a gray sedan. Doors opened, and silhouettes emerged. Four in total, three men and one woman. By Maggie's count, heart hammering, she lifted her old digital camera, zooming in as best she could. The men carried themselves with a deliberate urgency, scanning the hotel facade for signs of movement. Then one of them called out in a hushed tone, "Maggie, you hear?" She froze. That voice belonged to Daniel Turner. Even from a distance, she recognized the cadence. Another man stepped forward, tall, broad-shouldered, likely Victor Hayes, who Maggie had last seen at a company gala. The third figure was shorter, possibly Clark Raymond. Maggie squinted at the woman. She didn't recognize her, but the woman was dressed sharply, as if she were Daniel's legal or corporate counsel. Lucia touched Maggie's arm. Should we hide or speak to them? Maggie's instinct screamed, "Hide! They have cornered us." But if they searched the premises, they might find the carefully hidden evidence. She whispered back, "We need to remain unseen. The FBI told us not to confront them. Let them reveal their intentions first." From below, they heard Daniel's frustrated voice carry through the night air. "This place is a wreck. I told you we needed to come sooner." The unknown woman responded, sounding exasperated. "I'm here as a mediator, Mr. Turner. If your wife is indeed hiding here, we need to settle this quietly." Maggie ground her teeth in anger. A mediator. She pictured Daniel spinning a story about a hysterical wife who fled after a marital dispute, probably making it sound like she was mentally unstable. Just the sort of narrative to discredit any claims she might make about financial crimes. They advanced toward the front door. Daniel knocked, calling out, "Maggie, enough games. I'm here to bring you home. Let's talk this out." Silence. Maggie and Lucia exchanged anxious glances. The men then tried the doorknob. It was locked. Victor began kicking at it, and the sound reverberated through the deserted halls. Maggie's pulse skyrocketed. Should she allow them entry or keep them out eventually? The door frame cracked, and the men forced their way in, the sharp woman trailing behind. Maggie stifled a gasp. They were inside now, presumably scanning each room. It would only be a matter of time before they discovered signs of the rummaging, the missing documents. Then, a beam of a flashlight cut across the battered reception area, highlighting fresh footprints and the sealed storeroom. Maggie held her breath, praying the men wouldn't immediately guess where she and Lucia were hiding. Lucia's hand trembled on Maggie's arm. The older woman whispered, "What if they find the cellar?" The evidence. Maggie squeezed her hand in reassurance, though her own heart thundered with fear. We keep hidden until they show their intentions. Then we figure out our next move. Yet even as the words left her mouth, she questioned how long they could remain concealed. They were outnumbered, unarmed, and effectively trapped at the top of a derelict hotel. Maggie silently willed the promised assistance from Agent Chen to arrive, but knew it might already be too late. Crouched behind crumbling bricks, Maggie and Lucia listened intently to the voices echoing through the corridors below. Daniel barked instructions to Victor and Clark. "Search the rooms. She has to be here. Check if she left anything behind bags. Paperwork." The unnamed woman's voice chimed in, cautioning them not to cause unnecessary property damage. Maggie surmised she was some sort of lawyer Daniel had hired for personal or business reasons. Clearly, Daniel wanted a veneer of legality. Minutes crawled by. Doors slammed open. The rummaging noises grew louder. Maggie clutched the digital camera, debating whether to record audio, but every beep or flash risked revealing their location. Beside her, Lucia silently mouthed prayers, her knuckles white. The tension was almost unbearable, each footstep below an ominous reminder of how trapped they were. Suddenly, a male voice called, "Found something." Maggie felt her stomach drop. She strained to listen. "There's a hidden stash of receipts." The man continued, "It must have been the partial evidence they purposely left beneath the reception desk." Maggie wondered if this might be enough to distract them from hunting further. Daniel strode over. Maggie recognized his heavier footsteps and rifled through the papers. Then came a series of curses. "Damn it, she's on to us. This is the exact stuff I told you we needed to keep secure." The lawyer spoke up, her tone clipped. "If Margaret is going to the authorities with these documents, we need to do damage control now. We can't let her run loose in Italy with them." "Where is she?" Daniel's voice darkened. "She won't get far. Either we find her or she comes crawling back when she runs out of options. I've already frozen her credit cards." Maggie's skin crawled at how effortlessly Daniel orchestrated her financial downfall. The man she once trusted was systematically cutting off every lifeline. Masson. A pause followed. Then Victor said, "We should check upstairs. That's the only place we haven't looked." Maggie stiffened. They were coming. Quickly. She gestured to Lucia, pointing toward a narrow, half-hidden staircase that led to the hotel's attic. It was accessible from the balcony if one carefully climbed over the ledge. Lucia's eyes widened but nodded in agreement. They had no other choice. Slipping quietly out of sight, they squeezed through a shattered window frame. The chill mountain air struck Maggie's face, but adrenaline fueled her. She placed her foot onto a section of the ledge, testing it. Then, inch by inch, they climbed onto a precarious wooden support beam that extended toward the attic window. Below, the voices grew louder as Daniel and his partners ascended. "This floor is a death trap," the lawyer muttered when she encountered broken banisters. Daniel's response was muffled, but Maggie knew they were just a door away from discovering the balcony. Demon. A creak from the ledge made Lucia gasp. Maggie threw an arm around her to steady her. The attic window was only a couple feet away, but the old wood beneath them groaned ominously. One misstep could send them crashing 2 stories down. Summoning her old determination, Maggie leaned forward, pried open the attic window, and helped Lucia inside. Just as they disappeared into the gloom, they heard a crash from the balcony door below. Daniel had arrived. Holding her breath, Maggie eased the window shut and prayed the men wouldn't think to search the attic. They were safe, at least for the moment. Dust swirled in the cramped attic, illuminated by a lone moonbeam sneaking through a crack in the roof. Cobwebs draped the rafters like ghostly curtains. Lucia coughed into her sleeve, trying to stifle the sound. Maggie pulled out her phone, turning its brightness to the lowest setting, attempting to text Agent Chen. No signal. Her heart sank. If they couldn't reach law enforcement soon, Daniel's improvised search could escalate into something far more dangerous. Below them, the floorboards trembled as Daniel's group prowled the upper level. Empty rooms. Looks like no one's been living up here for a while, Clark muttered. The lawyer sighed. Is there any chance she left the property? Daniel retorted. Where would she go? Lucia wouldn't let her wander the mountains alone. She's here, hiding. Maggie stifled a bitter laugh. Daniel had no idea the extent of Lucia's loyalty. The older woman, trembling at her side, had shown Maggie more genuine compassion in a few days than Daniel had in years. Just the thought reignited Maggie's outrage, fueling her determination to outwit him. She glanced around the attic. Broken crates and sagging boxes littered the space. Part of the roof's support beam looked rotted. She wondered if there was a hidden hatch or a secondary stairwell that might lead them down and out of the building undetected. But rummaging around risked making noise. Footsteps approached the attic door, which was locked from their side by a simple iron latch. Maggie's breath caught. Someone was checking the handle, a faint rattling. She motioned for Lucia to remain still. The handle jiggled, and then Daniel's muffled voice. No point. It's sealed. Probably used for storage. Let's keep moving. The footsteps receded, leaving the door intact. Maggie exhaled in silent relief. They huddled there for nearly an hour. Every so often, they heard muffled arguments or the scraping of furniture as Daniel's crew tore through the upstairs rooms. Finally, Daniel barked, Enough! She's clearly not here. We'll regroup downstairs. The group clomped down the staircase, the noise growing fainter. Maggie and Lucia exchanged hopeful looks. Had they succeeded in hiding until the men gave up soon? The tension gave way to exhaustion, and Maggie found herself leaning against a stack of old linens, lulled by the rhythmic throbbing of her own pulse in her ears. She nearly dozed off when another sound jolted her awake, the distinct crunch of footsteps on the attic's roof, right above them. Her eyes flew open, and she gestured for Lucia to be quiet. Perhaps a branch from a nearby tree had fallen, or an animal scurried across the shingles. But then a voice hissed, Check the roof. You said, I'm telling you, there's nothing up here. It was Victor. He was standing on a section of the roof that extended over the attic. Maggie could see the faint outlines of his silhouette through the cracks. Steel-tipped boots creeping precariously close to a spot where the wood looked weathered and soft. A swirling dread erupted in her gut. One unlucky break in the roof could send Victor plunging straight into the attic, right where they hid. She clung to Lucia, both of them quietly trembling. If the roof gave way, not only would Victor land in their hiding spot, but the entire confrontation would erupt with violent immediacy. For a nerve-shredding minute, Victor's footsteps shuffled overhead. Maggie envisioned him pressing an ear to the roof, trying to detect movement. Lucia squeezed her arm, eyes closed in prayer. Then Daniel's faint voice echoed from below Victor. Get down from there. We're leaving. This is a waste of time. Reluctantly, Victor descended the roof, cursing under his breath about chasing ghosts. Maggie felt lightheaded with relief. They waited, counting each minute in tense silence. The sounds of doors slamming echoed through the building once more. Then footsteps crossed the lobby. Daniel snarled something about finding her eventually. Engines started outside, flooding the courtyard with the glare of headlights. Maggie dared to creep closer to the attic window. She peeked out just in time to see both vehicles reverse out of the driveway and disappear into the night, leaving only swirling dust in their wake. Neither Maggie nor Lucia spoke for a full minute. They merely stared at each other, breath coming in ragged gasps. Then Maggie whispered, "We did it. They're gone." Lucia let out a shaky sigh. For now, the older woman wiped her forehead. "But they'll be back. No, he is your husband. He will not give up so easily." Maggie nodded grimly. Daniel is methodical. Once he's convinced I'm a threat, he'll do everything possible to neutralize me. That word neutralize sat heavily in the air. They both understood it might not just mean scaring her away. Men who laundered millions of dollars wouldn't hesitate to use violence if cornered. "We can't stay here," Lucia finally said, voice trembling. "It's too dangerous. We should go to the village again, ask for help. The FBI said they would send someone, but I don't know when." Maggie hesitated. Fleeing the hotel meant leaving behind the best leverage they had, the physical evidence. Yet if they stayed, they risked Daniel returning with more men or simply torching the place to destroy everything, including them. Checking the newly delivered phone. Maggie found no service. "The coverage is too spotty," she muttered. "We'll have to risk the walk down, or see if we can fix that radio phone." Lucia shook her head. "I can try, but it's ancient. We need real technology." Maggie weighed the risk. "Then we'll make our stand another way. Let's gather everything we can carry: documents, hard drives, the camera, and go to the village by morning. We'll contact the authorities from there. Upload the files to a secure database if possible." Lucia nodded, though her eyes shone with fear. They spent the remainder of the night methodically packing evidence into 2 backpacks. Maggie included changes of clothes, spare shoes, water, and a few snacks. She refused to leave any original documents behind that might exonerate Daniel or keep him from facing justice. At dawn, they crept out of the attic, carefully descending the broken staircase to the lower floors. The building was eerily still, the aftermath of the forced entry evident in splintered door frames and scattered papers. Maggie clenched her jaw at the destruction, anger fueling her exhaustion. If Daniel had any lingering sense of humanity, he wouldn't have terrorized an old widow and the wife he once claimed to love. But love, she realized bitterly, was never truly part of the equation. It was about power and control. By the time they were ready to leave, the sun had risen fully, bathing the battered hotel in a deceptively gentle light. Maggie paused at the threshold of Villa Rosetta. She had arrived here a broken, abandoned woman just days earlier. Now, she was leaving as something entirely different, someone who no longer cared about preserving illusions. She would bring Daniel down, no matter the personal cost. Lucia locked the front door, though it was hardly secure after Victor's forced entry, and they set off down the winding mountain road, each burdened by a backpack laden with damning evidence. The initial silence between them felt loaded. Finally, Lucia cleared her throat. "Maggie, I must say, I never wanted trouble, but meeting you, it has given me courage I did not know I had." Maggie offered a small, grateful smile. "I owe you my life." "Lucia, if you hadn't taken me in that first night, I don't know what would have happened." Their plan was to reach the same cafe phone booth in the village, or better yet, find stable cell service along the way. Maggie's new phone had a minimal battery left, so she kept it off to conserve power. The trek was long and exhausting, especially for Lucia. About halfway down, they decided to take a brief rest along a curve in the road. The view over the valley was breathtaking rolling hills dotted with olive groves and vineyards. Under different circumstances, it might have been a romantic getaway. Maggie felt a pang of sadness for what might have been if Daniel hadn't chosen corruption over an honest life. How did we get here, she wondered. She was lost in thought when a distant rumble caught her attention. A vehicle was approaching from behind. Maggie's heart clenched with worry, but she forced herself to appear calm. Lucia edged closer. Soon, a dilapidated pickup truck pulled into view, driven by an old man wearing a straw hat. He slowed as he spotted two women with backpacks, offering a cautious wave. Lucia flagged him down, explaining in rapid Italian that they needed a ride to the village. Maggie caught fragments of the conversation emergenza. Stranieri, aiutare. The man nodded sympathetically and motioned for them to hop in the back of the truck. Relief washed over Maggie as they rattled along, leaving the mountain road behind. She leaned against the wooden side of the truck bed, the wind whipping her hair. Lucia closed her eyes, possibly offering a silent prayer of thanks. It was a small reprieve from the dread that had followed them for days. But even as the truck swayed, Maggie's mind churned with the next steps. They would call Agent Chen, hopefully receive immediate instructions. If the FBI's cooperation with local authorities was official, a protective unit might already be en route to the hotel or the village. And what if Daniel has men stationed there too? The question darkened her thoughts. 20 minutes later, they reached the village. It was early enough that few shops had opened. The driver let them off near a small piazza with a weathered fountain. Maggie offered what euros she could spare, but the man refused, waving goodbye with a gentle smile. Stepping onto the cobblestones, Maggie inhaled the cool morning air. "All right," she murmured to Lucia. "Let's find a secure phone line. Time to bring the hammer down. Ya esperen." The village was stirring awake by the time Maggie Turner and Lucia Benedetti began their search for a secure means of communication. A few vendors were setting up stalls in the piazza, offering fresh produce, bread, and flowers. The two women kept their heads low, anxious to avoid drawing attention. The last thing they needed was for one of Daniel's contacts to spot them. They found a modest cafe, opening its doors a narrow space with mismatched chairs and a dusty sign above the entrance reading, Cafe Piave. Inside, a young barista was busy wiping tables. Lucia took the lead in Italian buongiorno. "Do you have a phone we can use? Ours is broken." The barista gestured to a payphone mounted to the wall. Maggie breathed a sigh of relief, some semblance of privacy. At least, she lifted the receiver, inserted coins from Lucia's jar, and punched in the number for Agent Sidney Chen. Each ring heightened her anxiety. Then a click, followed by a crisp voice. "Chen here," came the familiar tone, clipped and efficient. Maggie quickly explained where they were, that Daniel and his associates had invaded the hotel, that the situation was escalating dangerously. She also revealed they had gathered critical evidence enough to prove money laundering, international wire fraud, and complicity from certain banks. "We have everything in physical form, plus backups on digital drives," Maggie whispered, shielding the mouthpiece. "What do we do next?" There was a pause. "Stay where you are," Chen said. "I'm working with local authorities and a liaison from the Guardia di Finanza. We'll send a car, but we'll need your exact location, and we must confirm no one is tailing you." Maggie relayed the cafe's name, glancing toward Lucia, who gave a nod of approval. "We'll keep a low profile," she replied. "But please hurry. We don't know how long until Daniel realizes we're gone." Chen's tone softened. "Maggie, you've done incredibly well under extreme circumstances. Just a bit longer. Reinforcements will arrive soon." After they disconnected, Maggie felt a rush of conflicting emotions, relief that help was on the way, and fear that Daniel might strike again first. They ordered coffee and pastries under the guise of two weary travelers. The barista, noticing their large backpacks, asked if they were pilgrims trekking the countryside. Lucia forced a polite smile and answered vaguely, "Something like that." While they waited, Maggie's gaze darted constantly toward the entrance. She couldn't shake the feeling that every passing face might be an informant. After all, Daniel's resources were vast. If he could hire lawyers and muscle to bust down the doors of Villa Rosetta, he might well pay off a local or two to keep track of Maggie. A half hour passed with no sign of law enforcement. Maggie discreetly powered on her new phone, checking if the battery still held out. No calls, no messages. She was about to ring Agent Chen again when an elderly woman in the cafe let out a sharp gasp. Through the front window, two unfamiliar cars pulled into the piazza, their engines rumbling. Maggie's pulse quickened. Were these Chen's allies or Daniel's henchmen? Even Lucia tensed, clutching Maggie's arm. If they had to flee, there was nowhere to hide in such a small establishment. Exchanging a worried glance, they both rose, preparing for the worst. Stepping cautiously to the cafe's doorway, Maggie peered outside. The first car, a dark blue sedan, carried uniformed Italian law enforcement officers, their badges glinting in the morning sun. Relief washed over her. She glimpsed the Guardia di Finanza insignia on their sleeves, the specialized financial police that Chen had mentioned. The second car, a sleek black SUV, displayed no official markings, but Maggie suspected it might be where Chen or the American liaison was seated. The cafe patrons watched curiously as two officers exited the sedan. One was tall with a clipped mustache, the other shorter and stockier. Both wore serious expressions. Maggie exhaled a silent prayer of thanks. Lucia placed a hand on Maggie's shoulder. "Thank God they're legitimate," she whispered. Then, a woman in a dark suit emerged from the SUV, scanning the piazza before striding toward the cafe with purposeful steps. Even from a distance, Maggie recognized that poised stride. This had to be Agent Sidney Chen. Maggie and Lucia hurried outside. Chen's eyes found them, and she offered a brisk nod. "Maggie Turner," she asked, her American accent unmistakable amid the Italian chatter. Maggie nodded, her chest tight. Chen beckoned them to step aside, away from the cafe patrons' ears, while the two Guardia di Finanza officers secured the perimeter. "We received your intel," Chen said quietly, "and we've coordinated with the local authorities. They're prepared to move on the hotel soon, but first, we need to ensure your safety and that you have the evidence." Maggie gestured to her backpack, feeling oddly self-conscious. "It's all here, plus some digital copies," Lucia added. "There's more hidden in the hotel, but we weren't able to carry it all." Chen exchanged glances with the mustached Italian officer, who introduced himself as Captain Andrea Rinaldi. "Signora," Rinaldi said respectfully, "we'll see to the retrieval of any remaining files. But first, we must confirm the extent of the threat. Your husband, Daniel Turner, and his associates, do you know their current location?" Maggie hesitated. "They searched the hotel last night, then left. I'm worried they might track us here." Chen sighed. "It's possible. We should relocate you both somewhere safe. Once we review the evidence, we can coordinate a sting operation." Maggie glanced at Lucia, unsure if they'd be taken to separate locations. She hated the idea of abandoning Lucia after everything they'd endured. As if reading her thoughts, Lucia softly said, "I will do whatever is needed. Maggie, I trust you." Her tone carried an undercurrent of fear, but also resolve. Chen led them to the SUV while Rinaldi and his partner spoke into their radios, arranging for backup. Inside, The vehicle's interior smelled of leather and disinfectant. Chen produced a laptop from a black case, encouraging Maggie to hand over the digital drives. Over the next 20 minutes, they booted up the device, scanning folders and images. The more Chen saw, the more her neutral facade cracked to reveal amazement. "This is massive," she murmured, scrolling through endless ledgers. Money laundering, offshore transfers, fraudulent real estate deals, all tied neatly to Daniel Turner's operation. "Maggie, this is enough to nail them on multiple counts of federal charges back in the States, plus international charges here in Italy. You've done extraordinary work." A flutter of pride and sorrow mingled in Maggie's chest. She hadn't expected to return to her investigative roots. Certainly not this way. But if it meant stopping Daniel, it was worth every risk. She shut her eyes for a moment, steeling herself for whatever came next. Captain Rinaldi rapped on the SUV's window, beckoning Chen and Maggie to join him outside. Lucia followed, her expression uncertain. Standing in the piazza under a crisp blue sky, Rinaldi explained, "We can dispatch a team to Villa Rosetta immediately, secure any remaining evidence, and ensure it's sealed off. But we need to coordinate carefully. If Daniel Turner or his associates are nearby, they might flee." Chen, hands on her hips, scanned the horizon as though expecting Daniel to appear from behind a corner. "In my experience, these men, especially well-funded criminals, won't just run. They'll try to eliminate obstacles. Maggie, you and Lucia are prime targets." Maggie swallowed hard. The word eliminate rang uncomfortably in her ears. She understood too well that Daniel would consider her a greater threat now than ever before. "You'll both come with us." Chen continued, "We'll escort you to a secure safe house in Florence. Meanwhile, Captain Rinaldi's men will sweep the hotel. After that, we can strategize a coordinated sting to arrest Daniel and his crew." Lucia sighed in relief but looked nervously at Maggie, who nodded. "Yes, absolutely. Let's get somewhere safe." In truth, she also felt torn about leaving the battered but beloved Villa Rosetta, where so much had happened, yet she knew staying in that remote mountain place would be reckless. Chen and Rinaldi led them to the sedan. Maggie noticed one officer taking discreet photos of them likely for official records. Another officer hopped into the driver's seat. They pulled away from the piazza, the cafe and curious onlookers receding behind them. Through the back window, Maggie watched the black SUV follow. She remembered how powerless she felt only days before, abandoned with no resources. Now, ironically, she was moving under armed police protection because her evidence posed a mortal threat to Daniel's empire. Lucia dozed off briefly during the winding ride through the scenic valleys. Maggie stared at the rolling hills, olive orchards, and vineyards, a sense of tragic beauty filling her. Tuscany's allure had once drawn her and Daniel here on a romantic trip, though it had been anything but. She wondered if there had ever been a shred of genuine love in Daniel's heart, or if he had always viewed her as a convenient accessory, someone to sign documents and accept his narratives without question. After an hour, Captain Rinaldi's radio crackled with static. He answered in rapid Italian, occasionally glancing at Maggie with a look of concern. Chen leaned closer to listen, her brow creasing. When Rinaldi hung up, he cleared his throat. "We have a situation. It appears that another group, likely Turner's men, arrived at Villa Rosetta shortly after we left. They demanded to know where you were, rummaging through the place yet again." Maggie's heart pounded. Lucia looked stricken. "Did they hurt anyone?" she asked. Rinaldi shook his head. "No, the hotel was empty. But they inflicted further damage. Our local patrol arrived as they were fleeing in 2 cars." Chen rubbed her temple. "So they're panicking. Good. Means we're close to cornering them." Her eyes flicked to Maggie. "This might actually help our case. We'll have evidence of intimidation and destruction of property, but we need you two out of sight until we spring the trap." Maggie pressed her trembling lips together. She was relieved no one had been harmed, but also furious that Daniel's men would vandalize and threaten Lucia's livelihood. "Let's make sure he doesn't get another chance," Maggie murmured. The officer behind the wheel nodded, accelerating toward Florence, where the next stage of this high-stakes game awaited. Their destination turned out to be an unmarked townhouse on the outskirts of Florence, shielded by tall hedges and a wrought iron gate. Maggie recognized it as a classic safe house setup, inconspicuous, surrounded by similar homes, yet likely filled with subtle security features. The sedan and the SUV parked nearby. Chen, Rinaldi, and the other officers escorted Maggie and Lucia inside, swiftly checking the rooms. Once deemed secure, they guided the two women to a modest living room outfitted with basic furniture, a sofa, a small dining table, and curtained windows that blocked any view from the street. "Please, make yourselves comfortable," Chen said, gesturing at the couch. "We'll have meals brought in. As soon as we finalize the plan with local authorities, we'll let you know." Lucia, looking drained, sat down and exhaled deeply. Maggie perched beside her, still clutching her backpack. She refused to let the evidence out of her sight until she personally handed it over to the FBI's official chain of custody. Chen seemed to sense her anxiety. "We'll inventory everything soon," the agent promised gently. "First, rest. You've done so much already." A flurry of activity followed as the Italian officers conversed in low tones, made phone calls, and checked in with their squads. Chen stepped out onto a small patio, phone pressed to her ear. Maggie heard her mention extradition and coordinated arrests. Then another phrase that made Maggie's heart jolt. "He's not cooperating." The door shut, and her voice faded. Lucia turned toward Maggie, concern etched in every line of her face. "What do you think that means?" Maggie shook her head. "Probably that Daniel's refusing to negotiate or turn himself in. He must think he can outsmart the system." She paused. "I'm guessing he doesn't realize the extent of the evidence we've gathered. Otherwise, he might be more desperate." They lapsed into silence. Maggie considered the magnitude of what lay ahead. She would likely have to testify against Daniel in both Italy and the United States. The entire facade of their marriage would be aired in court. Her own complicity, albeit unwitting, would come under scrutiny. It was daunting, but she saw no alternative. Daniel had made his choice long ago. Chen re-entered the living room, her expression tense. "We've got intel that Daniel Turner and his associates are holed up at a luxury villa near Siena. They've reportedly brought in private security, essentially mercenaries. Local law enforcement is monitoring them, but we need to be cautious about a direct raid. We can't risk a shootout." Maggie's stomach knotted. She recalled Daniel's smooth talk about big deals in Siena. How he boasted to her, "Someday I'll own property all over Tuscany." A bitter laugh threatened to escape her. "So he's turned Siena into his personal fortress now." Chen nodded. "It won't last. We're close to obtaining warrants, and once we have full cooperation from the Italian government, we'll bring in specialized units. The question is whether we can draw Daniel out or if we need to storm the villa." Lucia looked horrified. "That sounds like a war." Chen rubbed her temples. "Financial crimes of this scale can escalate. Yes, these criminals have no qualms about employing violence." Maggie's mind flashed with images of Daniel orchestrating bribes, forging documents, terrorizing Lucia's property, and leaving her abandoned in the mountains. She tried to quell her anger, reminding herself that she was here to see justice done through lawful means, not vigilante revenge. "Tomorrow," Chen continued, "we'll do a formal debrief. We'll record your statements, Maggie, Lucia, and we'll electronically upload all the files you've gathered. After that, Rinaldi's team will finalize the plan. She must have noticed Maggie's trembling hands because her voice softened. Try to rest tonight. We'll station 2 armed officers outside. You're safe here. Maggie managed a wan smile, though safety felt fragile. She couldn't help but wonder if Daniel was plotting his own strike at that very moment. Late that evening, Maggie found herself unable to sleep. The safe house bedroom was spare a single bed, a nightstand, and a small lamp casting weak yellow light. She glanced across the small corridor to see Lucia's door slightly ajar. The older woman had finally succumbed to exhaustion. Outside the window, the hush of the Florentine suburbs blanketed the night. Maggie rose and padded into the living room. Perhaps a glass of water would calm her swirling thoughts. She discovered Agent Chen sitting at the dining table, laptop open, reading through scanned documents. The agent glanced up, gave a short nod. Couldn't sleep either. Maggie shook her head. Not with all that's happened. Chen's gaze softened. I've seen a lot of corporate corruption cases, but rarely does a spouse gather the evidence this effectively. You have a gift, Maggie. Maggie shrugged, a mixture of pride and sorrow in her chest. I used to do this for a living, until I left that life behind. Chen leaned forward. Mind if I ask why you stepped away from what I see? You were brilliant at it. Maggie blew out a slow breath. Daniel, he insisted I relax, enjoy life, let him handle the messy details. I was dealing with health issues, chemo, surgeries. At the time, letting go of my career felt like the easiest path. She paused, eyes stinging. But you can guess how that turned out. Regret's a powerful thing, Chen said quietly. But maybe it led you here, stopping a criminal empire. That's no small feat. Maggie nodded, reflecting on the irony. Indeed, if she had never given up her job, Daniel might have hidden his schemes better. Or perhaps he never would have married her in the first place. She looked away, not trusting herself to speak. Suddenly, her phone buzzed with a text alert, startling them both. Maggie checked the screen, a message from an unknown number. It read, Maggie, I need to see you. Please, everything can be fixed. I made a mistake. D, her breath caught. Chen leaned over. Is that from Daniel? Maggie nodded. He's texting me. The adrenaline spiked in her veins. Chen's eyes narrowed. We can't trust anything he says. He's likely fishing for your location or hoping to manipulate you into recanting your testimony. Maggie read the message again, the flicker of old emotions swirling with fresh anger. Everything can be fixed. Did Daniel really believe a short apology could erase the betrayal, the abandonment, the illegal empire? Another message followed immediately. I'm alone, I swear. Just give me a chance to explain. Sienna, the Villa Montegro, please. Maggie's hands shook. Chen took her phone, read the message carefully, and hissed through her teeth. He's luring you, obviously. Probably thinks if he can get you alone, he can either coerce or harm you. A wave of nausea twisted Maggie's stomach. If I respond, she whispered, will it help us? Chen considered, potentially, we might orchestrate a controlled meet, but it's risky. We'd need a tight perimeter, and we have to confirm the Italians are on board. Maggie swallowed. I want to face him, but not if it jeopardizes the case or our safety. Chen placed a reassuring hand on Maggie's shoulder. We'll do it right. Daniel is overconfident if he thinks you'll just stroll back into his arms. We can use that to bring him down once and for all. Maggie exhaled, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. Let's end this. He's already taken too much from me, from Lucia, from all his victims. Chen gave a firm nod. Agreed. We end it. By dawn, Chen and Captain Rinaldi were in deep consultation, coordinating with higher-ups who weighed the pros and cons of setting a trap. Maggie and Lucia listened anxiously, sipping coffee around the safe house's small kitchen table. The plan forming was straightforward, yet fraught with peril. Maggie would reply to Daniel's text, feigning willingness to meet him at Villa Montegro in Siena. A specialized tactical team from the Guardia di Finanza and local carabinieri would be stationed discreetly around the villa. Once Daniel arrived and made contact, they'd move in for the arrest. Lucia trembled at the thought of Maggie walking into that scenario. "You could be risking your life," she murmured, voice quavering. Maggie clasped her hands. "I know, but if we don't force a confrontation, he might vanish. Daniel can bribe or threaten people anywhere in the world. We need to corner him now, while we still have the upper hand." Rinaldi nodded in agreement. "If he senses a full-scale raid, he'll flee or fight. Neither is ideal. A controlled meet with you at the center is the best chance to apprehend him quietly." From the safe house lounge, Chin called them over. "All right, Maggie, go ahead and craft your response. Keep it short and uncertain, so he believes you're conflicted." Maggie's stomach churned. She typed shakily, "Daniel, I'm scared and confused. Why do you want to meet? So much has happened, but maybe we can talk. Are you sure it's safe?" She hesitated, then hit send. The reply came within minutes. "Yes, safe. I have something important to tell you. Alone, please." Chen grimaced. "He's insisting on a loan. We expected that. Confirm that you'll come, but mention you need time." Maggie typed, "Give me a day. I need to figure out how to travel there. I have no money, no phone. I'm at a small inn near Arezzo. I'll head to Siena tomorrow morning." She glanced at Chen, who nodded approval. "Good. We'll use that day to finalize the sting operation." Throughout the rest of the morning, tension ran high. Lucia busied herself cleaning the small living room obsessively, while Maggie helped Chen sort the digital files to send to FBI headquarters. She found solace in the methodical nature of the task, naming folders, cross-referencing accounts, labeling evidence. Each file was a nail in Daniel's coffin. The biggest twist, she reflected grimly, was how thoroughly she had ended up working against her own husband's criminal empire. Around midday, an alert sounded on Chen's phone. She glanced at it, then looked up at Maggie with excitement. "We have official clearance from the Ministry of Justice here in Italy. The operation is a go. They'll form a perimeter around Villa Montegro at dawn tomorrow. We'll have snipers, roadblocks, everything to ensure Daniel can't just slip away." Maggie swallowed, heart pounding. "So I just walk in and talk to him?" Chen gave her a tight-lipped smile. Assume. "Not alone, I promise. We'll wire you up with a tiny transmitter. We'll be listening the whole time. And the second we confirm his intent to commit further crimes or harm you, we move in." Lucia looked worried but said nothing. Maggie found she was simultaneously terrified and resolute. This moment had been building for far too long. If a confrontation in Siena was what it took to end Daniel's machinations, then so be it. She steeled herself, remembering every humiliating detail, being left alone in the mountains, rummaging through dusty files at Villa Rosetta, the night spent fearful that a henchman would kill her in her sleep. Yes, she would face him, and this time she would not blink. Early the next morning, the safe house buzzed with controlled chaos. Uniformed officers slipped in and out, exchanging urgent Italian directives. Captain Rinaldi had a large map of Siena's outskirts laid out on the dining table. Villa Montegro sprawled across a hillside just outside the city, an estate with acres of cypress-lined gardens, multiple outbuildings, and a high perimeter fence. It was, in essence, a fortress. Nonetheless, Rinaldi's plan assigned squads to each potential escape route. Chen scrolled through an aerial feed on her laptop, courtesy of a police drone that hovered somewhere over the villa, capturing real-time footage. Maggie stood off to the side, a bundle of nerves, while an Italian technician fitted her with a tiny transmitter disguised as a decorative pendant around her neck. "Microphones here," he explained in broken English, pointing to a minute hole in the ornament. "Battery lasts a few hours. Don't speak directly into it, just speak normally." Lucia approached with trembling hands. "Please be careful. Maggie, I owe you my life. I don't want you to risk yours." Maggie managed a tight smile, hugging her. "I owe you too. Lucia. After this, maybe we can restore Villa Rosetta properly, start a legitimate business there." Her words were half dream, half promise. Lucia nodded, eyes glistening with tears. It was time to go. Maggie was escorted to a plain sedan provided by the local authorities, while Chin and Rinaldi would travel in separate vehicles with specialized teams. The plan involved Maggie driving alone into the villa's vicinity, maintaining the illusion that she had scraped together funds and come by borrowed car from Arezzo. Once Daniel revealed himself, the strike teams would close in. If everything went smoothly, the confrontation would end with minimal violence. Maggie gripped the steering wheel, ignoring the flutter of dread in her stomach. Behind her, unmarked police cars followed at strategic distances. The drive took just over an hour, weaving through rolling hills, olive groves, and small Tuscan towns. Maggie's phone buzzed with a text, "Where are you?" from Daniel. She waited, as instructed, until she neared Sienna's outskirts to reply. "Almost there. 15 minutes." Another message came instantly. "Meet me at the side entrance. No one else." Maggie's mouth went dry. Daniel truly expected her to come alone. The arrogance of it stung. At the final turnoff, the police cars dropped back, while Maggie continued alone up the winding private road. Her heart hammered as the imposing gates of Villa Montegro came into view. Built of aged stone, the estate radiated old-world luxury, exactly the kind of place Daniel would adore flaunting. She slowed, scanning for signs of people. The gate stood ajar, an unsettling invitation. She eased the car through, and her gaze swept the ground's manicured lawns. Ancient statues, a fountain at the center of the courtyard. No immediate sign of Daniel. "Chin, Rinaldi, can you hear me?" she whispered, hoping the transmitter worked. Static crackled faintly. Then Chin's voice, calm and reassuring, responded, "We're here. Maggie, you're doing great. Just proceed normally. We have visual from the drone. There's movement near the east wing." Maggie parked near the fountain, killing the engine. She exhaled, her mind flashing with memories of Daniel's betrayal. For an instant, fear welled up, but she squared her shoulders. "In this," she reminded herself. She stepped out into the still morning air, scanning the villa's elegant facade. Time to face the monster in his lair. The courtyard was eerily quiet, no birdsong, no buzzing insects. As though the entire estate held its breath, Maggie's footsteps clicked on the cobblestones. A tall hedge surrounded the property, likely meant for privacy but perfect for concealing the police teams. She prayed they were in position. Each second stretched taut as she approached the side entrance Daniel had mentioned via text. Then, the heavy wooden door creaked open, and there he stood, Daniel Turner, in a tailored suit, looking every bit the suave businessman she once admired. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper, stress etched into his features. And yet, he tried for a reassuring smile. "Maggie," he said softly, stepping forward with open palms. "I'm so glad you came." She held her ground, ignoring the sting of nostalgia in her chest. Seeing him again felt like stepping back into a nightmare. "You asked me to? Why?" He hesitated, casting a glance behind her, presumably checking if she was alone. Seemingly satisfied, he gestured for her to follow him inside. Her pulse raced. This was the moment of maximum danger entering his domain. Yet she had to do it to secure the evidence of his intentions. The interior corridor was grand marble floors, vaulted ceilings, Renaissance art along the walls. She felt Daniel's presence close behind her. "We can talk in the study," he murmured, guiding her into a lavish room with mahogany shelves and leather armchairs. A wide window overlooked the manicured garden. Maggie caught a glimpse of movement in the hedges. The police, she thought. She hoped Daniel wouldn't notice. He closed the study door. Then he turned to her, voice hushed yet intense. "Maggie, this has gone too far. The authorities are after me, after Victor and Clark. But none of that is important. I need you to understand that everything I did for us." She scoffed, stepping away. "Stop lying. You left me stranded in Italy. You threatened an old widow. You set up an entire laundering ring. That wasn't for us. That was for you." Pain flickered in his eyes. "You don't know the full story. I was cornered by certain investors, forced to hide their funds. It spiraled out of control. Yes, I made mistakes, but we can fix this." Maggie's anger flared. "Fix it, I have evidence. Daniel, bank statements, shell companies, enough to bury you in prison." She dared to say it aloud, praying it might coax him into incriminating admissions for the recording. "You used my name on some of those accounts. Do you know what that did to me?" He ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, frustration evident. "I had no choice. It was safer that way, so no one would suspect a high-profile CEO. And you," he paused, lowering his voice. "You used to be so brilliant with finances. I admired that. I thought maybe you'd understand the intricacies. See, it wasn't purely criminal." Maggie's rage boiled over. "Not purely criminal. It's money laundering, defrauding governments, destroying innocent people's lives. Did you think I'd just stay quiet once I knew?" She stepped closer, searching his gaze. "Why did you abandon me at Villa Rosetta?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Because you were asking questions. Maggie, you become a liability. I thought a scare might make you back off. I never meant for you to go to the police, but you did." There it was, the confession. She could practically feel the microphone capturing every damning word. Her heart pounded. Now, if Chen was on the other end, they had enough to act. She took a breath. "You tried to scare me into silence. You're still trying." He shook his head. "No, I'm trying to protect us. My lawyers can negotiate a deal if you'll recant. Just say you misunderstood. We'll vanish from the public eye. Start fresh somewhere else. I'll keep you safe." She almost laughed at the absurdity. "Keep me safe from whom you—" Daniel's composure cracked, and his next words tumbled out hot with desperation. "Damn it, Maggie, stop acting like I'm the enemy. I love you. We built a life together. Do you want to see me rot in prison?" Maggie's throat constricted for a brief, painful moment. She remembered their early days dinners in Manhattan, dancing under twinkling lights, his gentle hand on her back. But those memories clashed violently with the image of him leaving her on a lonely mountain road. She stiffened. "Daniel, you are the enemy, my enemy. Lucia's, the entire system you defrauded. If you truly loved me, you never would have done this. You wouldn't have lied to me, stolen my identity, or left me in danger. You destroyed us." Her voice caught, surprising her with how raw it sounded. A new tension filled the air. He glanced at the door, then back to Maggie, voice dropping low. "I don't want it to end like this, but you're giving me no choice." Her gut clenched. "What's that supposed to mean?" Daniel sighed heavily, his eyes cold. "If you won't recant, then I need to eliminate the risk. Once and for all." A spike of fear shot through her. His words were calm, but the implication was chilling. "You'd kill me?" she asked, disbelief lacing her tone. Daniel's gaze hardened. I'm not that man, but you forced my hand. People I work with, they don't tolerate threats to their operation. They'll want you gone, by any means. Maggie squared her shoulders. Then do it, because I'm not backing down. The microphone was surely picking up every word. She prayed Chin was listening. She prayed the team was in position to save her if Daniel snapped. Tension thrummed. Any moment could erupt in violence. Then a faint click behind her, a subtle shift in the hall. Maggie's heart soared, hoping it was the police. Daniel, however, was too consumed by his own anger to notice. Before either of them could speak again, the door burst open. Victor Hayes barreled in, panting. Daniel, we've got a problem, he said in a ragged voice. There's movement on the perimeter. And he froze, seeing Maggie. Surprise flashed in his eyes. You're here, Maggie swallowed a wave of panic. She recognized the harsh glint in Victor's eyes, reminiscent of the time he and Clark had rummaged through Villa Rosetta. He was Daniel's right-hand thug. Daniel shot Maggie a glare that screamed, "Stay quiet," then turned to Victor. "We're talking. Keep watch." Victor shifted uncomfortably. "I think it's the cops." Daniel stiffened. "Are you sure?" Victor nodded. "Saw them from the east wing. They're in the hedges, carrying rifles. This place is surrounded." A swirl of emotions tore across Daniel's face. Shock, betrayal, fear. Slowly, he turned to Maggie. "You brought them here," he whispered, voice trembling with rage. Maggie met his gaze squarely. "Of course I did." For a heartbeat, no one moved, as though the world had ground to a halt. Then Daniel lunged for Maggie's arm, gripping it hard. Victor stepped toward the door, presumably to bar it shut. The plan was seconds from going to hell. But outside, a megaphone blared in Italian. "This is the Guardia di Finanza. Drop your weapons and surrender immediately." Maggie's heart leaped. They'd arrived in full force. Daniel's eyes flicked madly, searching for an escape. She could practically see him weighing whether to take her hostage. A swirl of chaos beckoned, her lips parted in a single shout. At Maggie's cue, everything erupted. Daniel jerked her sideways, using her body like a shield. Victor swore and fumbled for something in his jacket, likely a firearm. Then, from the hallway, a thunderous crack filled the air. Wood splintered as a specialized entry team rammed the door. Masked officers in tactical gear swarmed inside. One shouted commands in Italian, "Hands up, don't move." Another barked into a radio, confirming infiltration of the East Wing. Maggie felt Daniel's grip tighten on her arm. He yanked her backward, pivoting to put the desk between them and the advancing officers. Victor managed to produce a handgun, though it shook in his grasp. Maggie's pulse pounded with a mix of terror and grim satisfaction. Their fortress was being stormed. She prayed no one would be killed. Their evidence was worthless if Daniel ended up in a body bag. The masked police fanned out, taking cover behind door frames and heavy furniture. Captain Rinaldi's voice boomed from the corridor. "Drop your weapons! Release the hostage!" Daniel's chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. Maggie felt him tremble, whether from fury or fear. She couldn't tell. With a fierce move, he spun her around to face him, pressing her close. "You think this solves anything?" he hissed. She glared. "Yes, it ends you." Before Daniel could respond, a flash grenade clattered across the marble floor, releasing a deafening bang and a blinding flash of light. Maggie's senses exploded in chaos. Ears ringing, vision seared white. She felt Daniel's grip slacken. She stumbled, disoriented. Shouts and muffled gunfire rattled the air. Somehow, she hit the floor, knees striking the polished stone. Her vision cleared in patches, enough to see an officer tackling Daniel to the ground. Victor, half blinded by the flash, raised his weapon wildly, but multiple officers swarmed him, shouting in rapid Italian. He fired a single shot that ricocheted off a marble column before he was wrestled down. The retort left Maggie's ears throbbing. She flattened herself, arms over her head, until the scuffle died down. Then she dared to look up. The scene was a tableau of armed police subduing Daniel and Victor. Daniel groaned, face pressed against the floor, an officer's knee on his back. His suit was rumpled, a far cry from the confident facade he wore earlier. An eerie calm settled. In the distance, another voice called out that the rest of the villa was clear. No sign of Clark or the third associate, though Maggie suspected they'd be picked up soon. Slowly, carefully, Maggie rose to her feet. One of the officers guided her away from the chaos, checking her for injuries. She was too stunned to speak. Her mind reeled, replaying the last few seconds Daniel's hostility, the flash grenade, the bullet ricocheting. Captain Rinaldi appeared, removing his helmet. His eyes were grim but relieved. "Senora Turner, are you all right?" She managed a shaky nod. Her body felt bruised, heart pounding out of her chest, but she was alive. Another officer shouted an update, both suspects apprehended, weapons secured. In a corner, Agent Chin emerged, removing tactical goggles. She locked eyes with Maggie and gave a small nod of triumph. Maggie turned her gaze to Daniel, who was being handcuffed. Their eyes met, and she saw stunned betrayal in his. No words passed between them, but she knew exactly what he was thinking. He had lost comprehensively. Outside in the crisp Tuscan air, the courtyard pulsed with official vehicles. Blue lights strobed against the villa's stately walls. Maggie stood wrapped in a borrowed jacket, trembling slightly despite the warmth of the morning sun. Officers bustled around her, cataloging evidence from the estate. Some combed the gardens. Others hauled out boxes of documents from the villa's study and offices. Every so often, she caught sight of Daniel being led to a waiting patrol car. His wrists were cuffed behind him, hair disheveled, eyes burning with outrage. He mumbled something to an officer, likely threats or pleas. They shoved him gently but firmly into the back seat. Agent Chin approached, phone in hand. "We've got Victor in custody, too. Clark Raymond was apparently off-site, but we've radioed local units to track him down. One of Daniel's security guys squealed about his location. He'll be next." Maggie closed her eyes, relief coursing through her. The ringleaders were falling like dominoes. She blinked back tears, remembering how powerless she felt not long ago stranded at Villa Rosetta, with no phone, no money. Now, here she stood as a key witness to her husband's downfall. Chin must have noticed the tears threatening to spill. "Maggie, you did it," she said softly. "All that evidence you collected, your willingness to set this trap, it all paid off." Maggie tried to speak, but emotion clogged her throat. The memory of Daniel's final threat still rang in her ears. She'd come within inches of real harm, maybe worse, yet the operation had been successful. The old sense of moral conviction she once treasured as a forensic accountant swelled in her chest. He was never going to surrender. She whispered at last, "He thought he could dominate me like always." Chen nodded. "It's over for him. We'll file charges here in Italy, and the U.S. is preparing extradition requests on multiple counts. He's facing decades in prison." Maggie inhaled a shaky breath. "He deserves it." She paused, then turned to Chen with genuine gratitude. "Thank you for believing me and ensuring I didn't have to face him alone." Before Chen could reply, a police officer signaled Maggie over to a second patrol car. She looked through the window and saw Victor slumped in the back seat, his face bruised, presumably from resisting arrest. He spat curses when he noticed her, but the officer muffled him. Maggie's lip curled in disgust. At least Daniel had once shown her some semblance of kindness. Twisted though it was, Victor appeared to revel in cruelty from the start. She stepped away, spotting Captain Rinaldi. Any sign of Clark, she asked. The captain offered a wry smile. Unofficially, we know he's holed up in a friend's villa near Pisa. We have men on the way. He won't escape. Maggie nodded. She thought of Lucia, alone in the safe house. A wave of longing to see her friend washed over her. I need to get back to Lucia. Let her know it's done, she told Chen. The agent smiled. She's already on her way here, escorted by some of our team. She insisted on coming to check on you. Maggie's chest warmed. She pictured Lucia's kind face, the unwavering support. Good, she murmured, because after all this, we have a hotel to rebuild and a life to reclaim. Chen nodded, a small grin tugging at her lips. Now that's something I look forward to seeing. A few hours later, Maggie stood on a small terrace at the rear of Villa Montegro, gazing out over rolling hills. The initial chaos of the raid had subsided, replaced by a methodical evidentiary sweep. Daniel, Victor, and several of their guards were carted off. Police were taking inventory of everything from computers to hidden safes. Drones circled overhead, capturing final overhead images. Rinaldi's men hammered shut the main doors, declaring the estate an official crime scene. It was a thorough, if somber, transformation from the opulent lair Daniel had tried to create. Maggie rubbed her sore wrists, the adrenaline crash hitting her body hard. She felt like a marionette whose strings had just been cut loose, wobbly, yet somehow free. A soft voice behind her spoke her name. Turning, she saw Lucia, escorted by an officer. The older woman rushed forward and enveloped Maggie in a gentle hug. Maggie shut her eyes, feeling tears threaten again. You're okay, Lucia whispered, relief flooding her words. Grazie a Dio. They pulled apart, and Maggie motioned around them. We got him. Lucia, Daniel, Victor, they're done. Lucia wiped at her cheek. I was so afraid for you, but you're safe. Maggie nodded, smiling through the swirl of emotions. And thanks to you, I had a place to stand when it all seemed hopeless. We faced them together. Captain Rinaldi soon joined them, a thick file folder in his hands. Senora Turner, we found more incriminating files in the basement. It corroborates everything you provided. The case is ironclad. Maggie felt a wave of satisfaction, but also a pang of sorrow for the marriage she now realized had been built on lies. She forced a nod. Thank you, Captain. Rinaldi offered a polite bow. We'll be finalizing charges. You both may need to remain in Italy for a while to testify, but once that's done, you'll be free. Ye gasu. Also, I've been told the Ministry of Justice might have certain compensatory measures for your troubles. Maggie blinked, not fully comprehending. Lucia caught her arm. It means you could receive a financial reward. Yes, or maybe the right to purchase the properties Daniel used. Maggie's mind flitted to Villa Rosetta, to the dream she'd shared with Lucia, restoring it to its former glory. The idea felt strange, given how traumatic her time there had been, yet she found herself wanting a fresh start, something that gave meaning to the pain they had endured. Owning a piece of Italy, she thought, turning the place where I was abandoned into a sanctuary, a symbol of survival. She swallowed, looking at Lucia. We have a lot to consider. Lucia's smile was warm. We do, but I think if we rebuild, it'll be on our terms. Maggie returned the smile. Yes, no hidden safes, no criminals, just an honest enterprise. The two women laughed softly, a mutual sense of hope in the air. Behind them, Chen appeared with a phone in hand. Maggie, the FBI in the States wants to coordinate statements as soon as possible. We can set up a secure video conference from Florence tomorrow. Maggie tensed. realizing the looming legal battles ahead: court hearings, depositions, media scrutiny. Yet there was also an undeniable sense of liberation. She had taken back control of her life and her destiny. "Let's do it," she told Chin firmly. "I'm ready." The next few days blurred into a parade of legal procedures. Maggie and Lucia were escorted to a temporary suite in Florence, courtesy of the Italian authorities. From there, Maggie spent hours giving recorded depositions, both to the Guardia di Finanza and to USE officials via secure video links. She recounted every detail from discovering the suspicious documents at Villa Rosetta to the final showdown at Villa Montegro. Each retelling was grueling, dredging up fresh waves of emotion. But Maggie pressed on, reminding herself that testifying was the final nail in Daniel's coffin. In spare moments, she'd step onto the balcony overlooking the Arno River, letting the bustle of Florentine life ground her. Lucia joined her sometimes, and they'd talk about small things: favorite recipes, comedic language mix-ups, anything to break the tension. Occasionally, Agent Chin dropped by with updates. Clark Raymond had been caught near Pisa, attempting to flee the country on a private jet. Additional funds were seized from Swiss and Cayman accounts. The case was snowballing, implicating more white-collar accomplices. Maggie found a strange sense of satisfaction in seeing the entire corrupt network unravel. Back in the suite, Lucia was on the phone with her sister in Rome, explaining the ordeal. Maggie overheard snippets, mostly expressions of relief and exclamations of disbelief. When Lucia hung up, she turned to Maggie with a gentle smile. "My sister says she always knew I was stubborn, but she never imagined I'd be part of taking down a criminal ring." Maggie chuckled. "We're quite the team, you and me." Their small talk was interrupted by a knock on the door. Chin stepped in, wearing a rare smile. "Good news: Daniel Turner's initial hearing is set for tomorrow morning in a Florence courthouse. He'll be formally charged with multiple counts, including money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Victor and Clark face similar charges. You're not required to attend, but it might offer closure if you want to see him. After that, extradition proceedings will start." Maggie felt a jolt. Seeing Daniel again, this time in a courtroom, would be surreal. She glanced at Lucia, who gave an encouraging nod. "I think I need to see it," she told Chen quietly. "I need to watch him face what he's done." Chen inclined her head. "Understood. I'll arrange secure transport. Don't expect a quick hearing." Though his lawyers will likely petition for bail, claim special circumstances, but given the severity of charges and flight risk, I doubt he'll walk out. That night, Maggie slept fitfully, her mind churning with images of Daniel's face, once beloved, now a symbol of betrayal. She woke before dawn, stepping onto the balcony to watch the sunrise paint the sky over Florence in pink and gold. She whispered a silent vow to herself to move forward, to reclaim her life, to heal the scars of this ordeal. When the hour arrived, Maggie dressed in simple black slacks and a blouse. Lucia insisted on coming along. Chen and a pair of plainclothes officers guided them through a side entrance of the courthouse. The building loomed in classic Renaissance grandeur, tall columns framing the main doors. Inside, the marble floors reflected a swirl of motion: lawyers, guards, reporters murmuring about a major money laundering bust. Maggie kept her head down, grateful for the tinted glasses Chen had provided. This was no place for spectacle. As they reached the corridor outside the courtroom, Maggie's heart fluttered. She could hear the muffled din of voices. One of the officers pushed open the door, motioning them to slip into a bench near the back. Maggie took a steadying breath, bracing for the sight of Daniel in handcuffs. The courtroom was smaller than Maggie expected, with high-arched windows letting in shafts of pale morning light. She and Lucia slid onto a wooden bench in the last row. Agent Chen stood discreetly at their side, arms folded. A uniformed guard nodded politely, then gestured toward the front. There, at a table typically reserved for defendants and their counsel, sat Daniel Turner in a rumpled suit. His hair was unkempt, and dark circles ringed his eyes. Handcuffs glinted at his wrists. The sight sent an involuntary shiver through Maggie. At the prosecutor's table, a team of Italian legal officials shuffled documents, their expressions determined. Maggie recognized Captain Rinaldi among them, representing the financial police. The judge, a woman with stern features and wire-rimmed glasses, reviewed a thick file, lips pursed. Speaking in swift Italian, she addressed the charges laundering funds through Swiss, Cayman, and Italian accounts, forging official paperwork, orchestrating intimidation at Villa Rosetta. Each accusation struck Maggie like an echo of her own experiences. Daniel sat stoically, his lawyer occasionally whispering in his ear. At one point, the lawyer rose, launching into an impassioned argument that Daniel had been misunderstood, that there was a misinterpretation of financial transactions. Maggie clenched her fists, recalling the mountains of evidence that contradicted such a claim. Lucia glanced sidelong at her, eyes flashing with fury. They both knew the truth. Then it was time for the prosecution to present a summary of their evidence. Rinaldi stood, his voice firm and measured, recounting the physical documents, digital files, statements from witnesses, especially from one Margaret Turner. The mention of her name caused Daniel to stiffen. Jamaican? He turned, scanning the seats, and for a moment his eyes locked with Maggie's. A wave of conflicting emotions passed over his face: anger, betrayal, perhaps even regret. Maggie felt her pulse hammer. She refused to look away, silently holding his gaze until he turned back. The judge glanced at Daniel, arching an eyebrow. She spoke rapidly, likely addressing the question of bail. Daniel's lawyer contested, claiming Daniel had ties to the community in the U.S. and no reason to flee. The judge asked a pointed question. The lawyer fumbled. Rinaldi weighed in, mentioning the flight risk inherent in Daniel's wealth and network. After a tense pause, the judge announced her decision: bail was denied. A muted wave of relief swept through the room. Daniel's shoulders slumped, his lawyer placing a hand on his arm. The judge scheduled a formal trial date and had Daniel escorted back into custody. He rose unsteadily, wrists still bound. As he passed near Maggie, he cast her one last, piercing look. His lips parted, but no words emerged. She read the anger in his eyes, anger at her, at being thwarted, at the entire system that he once thought he could manipulate. When he disappeared through a side door, Maggie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Lucia gently squeezed her hand. "It's over," Lucia whispered. Though Maggie knew there might be months of legal proceedings ahead, still, Daniel would no longer roam free. As the courtroom emptied, Maggie followed Lucia and Chen into the corridor, her steps lighter than they had been in years. Over indeed. That evening, as pink and orange hues washed over the Florentine skyline, Maggie found herself back at the safe house balcony with Lucia by her side. The city below hummed with life horns, distant laughter, the clink of dinnerware from nearby cafes. Agent Chen had stepped out to finalize some paperwork, leaving the two women a moment of peace. Maggie leaned on the railing, her thoughts drifting over the remarkable, harrowing journey that had led here. A single text pinged on her phone. It was from David Kessler, her old mentor back in New York. "Heard the hearing went well. Proud of you, kiddo." She smiled faintly, remembering how it was David's call that saved her from complete isolation at Villa Rosetta. She replied simply, "Thank you. Couldn't have done it without you." Lucia sipped a glass of wine, then held it out for Maggie to taste. It was a local Chianti, rich and comforting. So, Lucia murmured, what next for you? Maggie closed her eyes, inhaling the floral scent of the evening. I'm not entirely sure. There will be the formal trial, probably extradition, testifying in the U.S. Daniel's empire might lead to bigger fish. She gave a little shrug. Professionally, I might go back into forensic accounting, maybe consult for the FBI or private firms. Seems I still have a knack for it. Lucia smiled. You should. It's who you are. A fierce investigator. Maggie's gaze dropped. I forgot that for a while. Let him overshadow me. Lucia reached out, covering Maggie's hand. No more overshadowing. Tears pricked Maggie's eyes. No more, she agreed softly. They stood in companionable silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Eventually, Lucia cleared her throat. And about Villa Rosetta. The authorities say you might be allowed to buy it legally once the property is released from the investigation. She paused, searching Maggie's face. I know it holds painful memories, but also maybe it could become something beautiful again. Maggie's heart twisted with unexpected longing. She recalled the peeling walls, the neglected courtyard, the modest kitchen, but she also remembered how that old hotel had sheltered her in her darkest hour, how she and Lucia had bonded while unearthing the truth. If we can, I'd love to restore it, she said, turn it into a real haven for people. Maybe travelers who appreciate history. Do it the right way, with no secrets hidden in locked rooms. A tear slipped down Lucia's cheek. Then we shall do it. Together. Yes. Maggie's own eyes brimmed. She laughed through the tears. Deal. We'll paint the shutters and fix the roof. Put in a proper dining hall. Even hire an actual staff. Lucia beamed. Sigh and maybe have cooking classes. Wine tastings make it a destination. Maggie nodded, imagining the possibilities. A final step in claiming her independence, forging a future not defined by Daniel's manipulations, a future built on her own strength. As dusk deepened, Chen appeared behind them, her expression serene. I see big plans brewing, she noted, stepping onto the balcony. Maggie turned, softly wiping her cheeks. We're just dreaming out loud. Chen gave a warm smile. Dream away. You've earned it. She placed a gentle hand on Maggie's shoulder. The toughest part is over. Now it's about rebuilding and using your talents without letting anyone stifle you again. Maggie gazed at the twinkling lights of Florence. For the first time in years, she felt an unburdened sense of hope. Daniel Turner was where he belonged, and she stood on the brink of a new chapter, one defined not by fear, but by courage and purpose. With Lucia at her side and the promise of Villa Rosetta's second renaissance, she allowed herself a small, contented smile. Yes, she thought, this is just the beginning. As the last rays of Tuscan sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in muted shades of violet and gold, she stood quietly at the edge of what she'd fought so fiercely to reclaim. The hotel, once a symbol of deception and betrayal, now represented rebirth, a reminder that even the darkest moments can give birth to strength we never knew existed. Justice had come at a price. Trust broken, love shattered, innocence left behind in the rubble of deception. Yet, amidst the ruins, she'd found something infinitely precious herself, stronger, wiser, unafraid to embrace the solitude and peace that came from choosing truth over comfort. Perhaps true freedom is always costly, demanding sacrifice before revealing its quiet rewards. As she turned away from the fading sunset, a gentle wind whispered through the olive branches, carrying memories and unanswered questions. Can we ever truly escape the shadows of our past? Or do they follow us, silent companions on the path forward? She paused, breathing deeply, ready to face whatever came next. For in the end, it isn't the scars that define us, but how we choose to wear them. What about you? Have you ever faced a moment when walking away meant reclaiming who you really are?